All right, in this explainer, we're diving into a text that makes a really powerful case about agreements, the consequences of our actions, and ultimately accountability. It's a journey into how this source sees the relationship between what we believe, what we do, and divine judgment. And wow, the source material doesn't pull any punches, does it? This line right here sets a very serious tone from the get-go. What their hands have written, that's all about taking responsibility for what you create. And what they have earned, well, that's the theme of consequences, plain and simple. It's all about accountability. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the core accusation, this idea of distorting the divine. Then, we'll get into the specific agreements it says were broken and a pattern of rejecting messengers. After that, we'll explore the why, what the text calls the price for a soul. And finally, we'll look at how it all wraps up with the final judgment.
Okay, let's start with that foundational charge, the one everything else is built on, the idea of distorting the divine. This is really the heart of the whole argument. So, what does distorting scripture actually mean, at least according to this text? Verse 79 is super specific. It's not just about a simple mistake. It's about deliberately writing something yourself, passing it off as divine, and doing it for what it calls a fleeting gain. So it's about the act itself and the selfish motive behind it.
That is a heavy accusation to start with, right? From there, the text expands its case by pointing to what it calls broken agreements or covenants to show that this isn't just some abstract idea. First, the text sets up what it considers a baseline for good conduct. In verse 83, it lays out this covenant that covers everything from the spiritual, like worshiping God alone, to the social. Be kind to your family and those in need, speak well to people, and handle your religious duties like prayer and charity. It's presented as a blueprint for a just community. And this is where the text really draws a line in the sand. On the left, you see the promise from verse 84, a clear agreement not to kill each other or force people from their homes. And then bam, on the right, the very next verse makes a direct accusation, but here you are, doing the exact opposite. The contrast is just stark. The text then argues that this wasn't just a one-time thing. It zooms out in verse 100 to claim this is a pattern, something that happens over and over. Every time they make a covenant, a group of them casts it aside. The accusation here is about a cycle of making and breaking promises. This whole idea of a recurring pattern of broken promises leads us right into the text's third major point, a similar pattern, but this time it's about rejecting the messengers who bring these divine messages in the first place. Instead of just stating an accusation, the text poses this really intense, direct question. It's asking, what's going on here? Why is it that whenever a messenger shows up with a message you don't want to hear, the reaction is arrogance, rejection, and even violence? To back up this claim, the text lays out a few examples. When Moses came with clear signs, the response described was worshiping a calf. When a book they should have recognized arrived, it was rejected. When a messenger came just to confirm what they already had, that book was basically thrown away. The text presents these as data points, proving a pattern. Okay, so the text has accused people of distortion, of breaking covenants, and of rejecting messengers. The big question is, why? And that brings us to the motive the text puts forward, choosing worldly gain over the hereafter. This quote really frames the whole thing as a transaction, doesn't it? It suggests that denying revelation isn't just about disbelief. It's a trade, a really bad one. The text argues they've sold their souls for a miserable price, making a direct link between rejection and a terrible deal. And to really hammer home this attachment to worldly life, verse 96 gives us this striking number. It says some people wish they could live for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. It's a symbol of this overwhelming desire to cling to this life no matter what. This focus on the world shows up in a few different ways in the text. It's that fleeting gain from the very beginning. It's the explicit trading of the hereafter for this life. It's even pursuing harmful magic. And it's that intense desire for a long life we just saw. All of these choices, according to the text, lead somewhere. And that's our final section. After laying out the actions and the motives, the text gets to the bottom line, the consequences, the final judgment for the path that was chosen. The text lays out two very clear parallel destinies. On one side, you have believers who do good works. They're promised an eternal home in paradise. On the other side, those who commit evil, they're promised an equally eternal home in what the text calls the fire.
The symmetry there is really powerful and deliberate. The text also gets specific about the consequence for those who, it says, believe in some parts of Scripture, but not others. And it's a two-part punishment. It starts with disgrace right here in this life, which is then followed by the harshest punishment on the Day of Judgment. Now, interestingly, the text also presents a counterclaim. It says some people hold, it mentions this belief that any punishment would just be temporary, that the fire will not touch us except for a number of days. This is in total contrast to the text's own warnings about an eternal fate, and it highlights a major disagreement on how judgment works. So, after weaving all this together, accountability, broken promises, consequences, the text kind of leaves us with this one big question to think about. What really is the connection between our beliefs, our actions, and the sacred texts we say we follow? The argument being made here is pretty clear. They're all completely and inseparably linked.